Okay, so this is an example of the language of light of the ring lords. This was the secret of the ring, in that only pure intention could hold this charge density, because in fact otherwise you would suffer the increase in charge that would result in the loss of spin here. So pure intention was required in order to create this ident I tie. There's a dimpling that happens where the little vortex is nested in the big vortex in there that requires the ability to discover what's shareable. So here's how compassion works now. This is from the biophysics literature, the book When Time Breaks Down by Arthur T. Winfrey. It's a model of the voltage wave that causes the heart to fire. And here's you feeling compassion. You make a picture inside your heart, which is so self-similar to what's outside, that the outside falls in. And that process of recursive turning inside-outness becomes implosive, self-organizing. And this dimple here is sucked in. When that dimple is sucked in, a longer wave is embedded. Embedding. And so each time another donut is sucked in, a longer wave, ride the long wave, Uncle Joe, surfer, right? So this ability to catch longer and longer waves then shows up here in the frequency signature of the EKG as another harmonic right here. It's called ascension. Remember this Sedona bumper sticker? Ascend already, we need the space, right? So this does in fact create space, because by creating fractal compression, which is very feminine, you make more space for waves to unpack into. So that ability to create that compression is called implosion. And so the wave gets permission to approach center and turn inside out. It's called Merkaba, but it's literally a vehicle for the storage of pressure. Merk, mark, ab, from, pa, pressure. And so if we have this geometry of this flow form, the braiding algorithm down that cascade is such that the dishes are in golden ratio, and the beat rates of the dishes are in golden ratio, and the water here is impossible to sink in when you get in the spa. The physics of the increased specific gravity is proportional to the increase in laminar coherence, which is spin density. Spin density is awareness density, is information density. Compression is the solution. Whatever the problem, compression is the solution. Okay. So this becomes some very simple physics, that fractality is embeddability, is non-destructive compressibility, turning inside-outness, scale invariance, spin density, information density equals charge density equals life force equals sustainability. It's the perfect geometry of distribution, which is called phyllotaxis, which is how a wave becomes shareable, and that's literally applicable to how a product becomes marketable based on the same tree structure. So here we're just showing the braiding algorithm. Remember we talked about how you get a soul in your DNA. Short wave, longer wave yet, until at the X cross of the X ray of the X braiding of the X chromosome, you have this charge radiance that actually creates this squirt gun through the speed of light, which is called getting a soul, up the Z-axis of your DNA. So when the ratio of the braiding is coherent, you get this field effect of perfect nesting, which looks like a fractal, the short wave on the longer wave yet. So that ability to braid your DNA, the way we talk about this, is the magnetic X is where your DNA crosses itself to become radiant when recursive or embedded. So in effect, what happens, this is a little introduction to bliss here. The concept of bliss, let me see if I can explain this. We've looked here now, let's turn the lights up for just a second here, yeah? We've looked here at the way in which the DNA responds to love. The DNA literally responds to love because it sees this series of frequency harmonics which cause the success of a braiding algorithm. So here's the DNA. It does this double helix little slinky thing, and you get this ratio of the long wave to the short wave in the DNA. That's ultraviolet, and yet your DNA is comprised of sound waves coming from your heart, which is bliss or euphoria. The sound wave is the long wave. It's the envelope the wave on the wave, the carrier wave in ratio to the envelope. The answer lies folded in an envelope. So here's what happens mechanically. You're there, your heart's singing, you're feeling passion. There's a sonic ponytail, a phonon wave, that mechanically braids your DNA like a snake charmer. Da, 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 right? And so your DNA responds to coherent sound from the heart, like your thymus is a catcher's mitt, and won't shrivel if there's bliss. Yeah? And so the sound of your heart and the bliss coming from your heart cause your DNA to know how to braid. Braiding DNA is emotion the weaver. Yes, emotion controls the braid of DNA, and therefore which RNA is exposed. And therefore emotion is the programmer for DNA. Do you see? We know that emotion programs DNA. You get depressed, you get a cold. The virus is DNA. The new information is how. The how is that this low-frequency, long-wave sound coherence, the phonon ponytail of the heart, creates a braiding algorithm which creates this compression wave to implode in your DNA. In German, bliss is called Glückseligkeit. Yes? Do I have that correct there, dear? I do? See? Thank you, dear. So Glückseligkeit comes from, I'm sure I haven't pronounced it right, though, have I? Oh, okay, thank you. So selig means to have a soul, selig. Selige? Yeah? And Glückseligkeit means to have bliss. So to have bliss contains the idea of having a soul. In other words, you don't get a soul if you didn't get bliss. And that's the physics. The physics actually is that your DNA is not mechanically ignited unless you're able to have bliss or passion. So the ignition of your DNA is dependent upon locating your passion. If you don't, you're toast. Now, that gets to, we spend a whole day on this in the weekend when we talk about the extraterrestrial origin of DNA. And we tell a very colorful fairy tale about ETs, Anunnaki, and Draco, and it's very colorful, and it's just like very entertaining. But you don't even need the fairy tale to get to the bottom line. The bottom line is simple. When the ancestors who came here to do the genetic engineering, which we call the Bible, they came here because their DNA had fallen, the Nephilim. How did the DNA fall? It was very simple. They lost passion, the ability to create glandular juices to get the stuff to grab a hold of your DNA like a tornado and make it implode and spin. So the leverage your DNA is a three-dimensional, shape-shifting slinky worm, right? And so what happens is in the presence of bliss, your DNA goes from to this to this. A double helix, right? So that braiding algorithm creates a compression wave, the toroidal DNA, Lord of the Ring. And what happens is then your DNA starts imploding. And that implosion, the fire in the center, makes DNA like a... ever see a jellyfish suck itself along in the ocean? The fire in the center is sucking magnetism through the speed of light in the center, and that's what enables the DNA to become self-steering. It's the physics of artificial intelligence. So in effect, the DNA cannot steer itself and gets dizzy if you do not set it free. Literally dizzy. That's why the wheat and corn and soy that's been monocultured for 1,000 years, the DNA is pissed off. It's angry. That's why it makes mucus. Because it can't self-steer if you don't set it free. If you don't set the character in your own dream free, you don't learn from them, right? So degrees of freedom in magic and chemistry have the same meaning. The amount by which you can learn something new from the reaction is the degrees of freedom you give it. So all of this has to do with our ancestral origin. They came here looking for a heart of gold, and they were growing old. Looking for a heart of gold. No? So what happened is, when you lose passion or bliss, your DNA begins to decay as a wave. Yeah? And so you lose a soul. And so if you don't have a heart of gold in mean ratio,